The chance I have to be a part of your lectureship this weekend and to be able to worship with you today and to share a message with you as this lectureship nears its conclusion. You know, as I said Friday night when I spoke that I haven't been here since 1994, I think, when I was a student at Memphis, and we came over like the young men, these men were, Friday and Saturday, you know, and that's the last time I think I've been in this church building. It was a long time ago, but I am so thankful to be back. I'm thankful that God brought the Britton family into my life a few years ago. I got to know Brandon and Jade, and they've just been an incredible encouragement to me. And then through them, I got to know Case. I'd known Sydney a little bit before because of Backwoods Christian Camp, but I just love and appreciate these folks. Good people, and I just am so encouraged by them. I love being around people who love the Lord and are just kind and good people. And you guys have been a blessing to me, and I know they're a blessing to this church. So thanks for giving me this chance to be here today. I'm with you in death. I'm with you in death. I was in the hotel room this morning, and I was looking over my this lesson on death, and I got a call at 8:43. I remember because I needed to make a call after I got this call, and I knew what time it was and what folks back home were doing. The elders were in a meeting with the ministers at that time, and when I saw her name pop up on my phone, I knew what she was going to tell me, because I'd called her on Friday before I left to come up here, and then I got a call later Friday, knew the situation. Her husband had been in the hospital since last Sunday. We announced it a week ago that he had been taken by ambulance to the ER. And then I got an update Friday afternoon when I was on my way up here. I knew the situation was grim, and so when I saw her name pop up on my phone this morning at 8:43, I knew what she was going to tell me. And she said Steve passed away, her husband, last night about 10:45 p.m., I think. And of course, we talked for a few minutes. I called and let the elders know. And but I found it, I don't know. I look back down at my lesson, you know, after I called the elders, after I called fellow ministers back home just to let them know what's going on so they could tell the church this morning. But I looked back down at my lesson, which is about death, and I kind of looked at it a little bit differently. You've gotten calls like that before, I know. It's not out of the ordinary. If you're in ministry, if you're in a church, you've got friends, you've got family, you've gotten calls like that, and you've probably had those situations where you look at your phone, you know what the call is going to be, you know what it's going to be about. Someone has passed away. But it made me think about this for the last, I looked over my lesson for about another 10 minutes before I headed over here a little bit ago, but just kind of thinking about this again through that lens, through the lens of my friends back home. People I've known for the last 20 years, just good, faithful, Jesus-loving people. And my friend Steve is enjoying, I have every confidence, he is enjoying the presence of Jesus like he had been anticipating for a long time. All this stuff I'm going to talk to you about today, I hope that maybe God will use something in it to encourage you to face death like Steve did, and to enjoy the blessings on the other side of that moment when you draw your last breath. If God will use this maybe in some small way to touch your heart. Some of you may need it in a special way because you're not where you need to be spiritually. I'm with you in death. Let's go to John 11. I appreciate the scripture reading. We'll pretty much stay right there in John 11. A pretty familiar story to you, I guess, but one that has so much to say to us about this topic. John 11 tells us a story about Jesus going to the house of his good friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, three siblings. These two ladies and this man had been a blessing to Jesus for many years. He had known them. He was a couple miles outside of Jerusalem. They lived in Bethany. He'd go there a lot, you know. When he came to Jerusalem, he'd spend the day in Jerusalem. He'd go in the evening to his friend's house and spend the night there, apparently, and go back into the city the next day. He loved these folks. They were close to him. First part of the chapter, he got word, you know, from Mary and Martha that their brother Lazarus, your friend, the one you love, he's sick. And I guess the message, the implication of the message was it's very serious. You know, this is a serious deal. Jesus waited a couple of days and then he left, and he and the disciples made their way to Bethany. By the time they got there, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. I want to read a few verses here, and we'll kind of go through it in stages. And I want to share with you a few things that I think that I think have so much to say to us about this particular topic. John 11. I hope you'll follow along with me. I'm going to start reading in verse 17. We'll read a paragraph or so, and then I want to just kind of key in on a couple of phrases, a couple of sentences here. John 11:17 says, "When Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you.' Jesus said to her, 'Your brother will rise again.' Martha said to him, 'I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day.' Jesus said to her, 'I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?' She said to him, 'Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world.'" So you've got this first interaction that Jesus has with Martha, one of the sisters. You know, you've got other cases where Jesus spent time with them. But it's an interesting thing. You know, he comes there, and Martha comes out, and I can't help but hear a subtext of accusation, you know, however mild it was, however respectful it was. In Martha's voice, you hear something here, don't you? Isn't this the implication of her words? We sent word to you, Jesus. If you had come, he wouldn't have died. It's her grief talking. She's upset at the situation. Her brother's gone, and that probably meant not only the emotional aspect of it, but perhaps in that culture, two sisters without their brother it also brings all sorts of implications for their lives, probably livelihood. She's upset. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But you know, when Jesus responds to her, he says, "Your brother's going to rise again." She says, I know that. She had some conviction of an ultimate resurrection at the end of time. Probably not in the same sense that she's going to understand it now, that she knows after Jesus talks to her. But she has some concept of a resurrection that's coming. And she says, I know he's going to rise again on the last day. But Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." This is one of those statements in the Gospel of John that kind of fits in with John's way of telling the story of Jesus. And you've got this throughout John's Gospel, more so. He's writing, I think, probably 30 years or so, 40 years or so after Matthew and Mark and Luke had written their Gospel. So he's writing later, John is. He's telling some things that weren't included in Matthew and Mark and Luke. And so he's got this kind of different perspective, and he's got this emphasis that you find throughout. And one of those emphases in John's Gospel is this focus on the deity of Jesus and the I amness of Jesus. You've got this text in John 8, 3 chapters earlier, where Jesus is in this dialogue/argument with some of the religious leaders of his day. And in that argument, in that conversation that he has with them, he says, "Before Abraham was," remember this? They made a statement about Abraham, and Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am." And they couldn't tolerate that. That led to them trying to kill him that very day. But before Abraham was, I am, because they knew exactly what he was doing when he said that. He was echoing what had happened in Exodus 3 when Moses found himself at the bush that was burning but wasn't consumed, and God spoke to him out of the burning bush. And Moses said, "If I go back and I lead these people, I go back to the people, they're going to ask me, 'Who sent you?' Tell them," you remember God's response to that, "Tell them, I am that I am sent you." And so Jesus says in John 8, "Before Abraham was, I am." They knew what he was saying. I am is this way of a statement of being that implies eternality. I am. You cannot go so far back that you come to my beginning. You can't go so far forward that you come to my end. I simply exist. I am the self-existing one. I was, I am, I will be, implied in the verb to be. I am. Before Abraham was, I am. And throughout John's gospel, he's got a number of those statements, you know. He says, I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd in John 10. He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. You've got these emphases throughout. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am. But here, in Martha's hour of need, when her brother's gone, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Don't you understand what I'm saying to you, Martha? I am the resurrection and the life. And when you face this moment in your own life, when you, and some of you have been to this moment in your family where you've lost a husband, you've lost a wife, you've lost a child, you've lost a parent or sibling, a good friend. You've lost somebody close to you, and you come to that moment where you experience this with Martha. What you need at that moment, even if you're not a believer, even if you're not a Christian, what you need at that moment is some assurance that everything's going to be okay. And the only way you can have that assurance is for someone to speak into your moment and to say there is something beyond this. There's something more than this. There's something beyond the temporal nature. There's something beyond the physical. There's something metaphysical. There's something beyond the natural, the supernatural. There's something more. And Jesus comes into that moment and He says, not just that I create life, though He does. Not just that I can bring about resurrection, though He can do that. But He says, I am the resurrection. I am the life. And so Jesus would say, not just I bring the bread of life, but I am the bread of life. He says, I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the way. I don't just show the way. I don't just bring the truth. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Do you see the difference there? And so Jesus comes to her into her moment of darkness, and He says, Martha, do you know who I am? When you face this moment, when you get the call from your doctor and the MRI results are not what you hope for, or the doctor steps into the room and you know what he or she's going to say, you know. Is there something beyond this life? Jesus says yes. And the reason you don't have to fear it is because He is the resurrection and the life. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is not only the creator and the sustainer of life, but He is life itself. And when you are in Him, you experience eternal life. And so death, it still brings grief. It still brings heartache and pain and suffering. But you look at it differently. That's why Paul would write to the church at Thessalonica, you grieve, but not as those who have no hope. Why? Because He's the resurrection and the life. Because we've got this confidence that death it's still an enemy of God, and it's been conquered by Jesus, of course, but ultimately we will enjoy the results of that victory on that final day. But Jesus says, I'm the resurrection and the life. That's what He says to Martha. He brings truth to her. She needed at that moment some kind of confidence that what had happened to her brother was not the end, that there was some meaning in it, that there's some way she can view that experience with hope. And Jesus says, I'm the resurrection. You know, you read on, though, and verse 28, when Martha had said this, she went and called her sister Mary saying in private, the teacher's here is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. Some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? So, you've got this second encounter here. And it's interesting. If you compare what Mary said to what her sister Martha had already said, there's no difference. Mary comes to Jesus, and you may know from other accounts of Mary and Martha, Mary seems to be the more contemplative one. She's the one who was sitting at Jesus' feet when Martha was busy serving in their little sisterly argument. You remember that from Luke 10. Mary is contemplative. She's thoughtful. She's introspective. But she comes to Jesus and she says exactly what her sister said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Notice how Jesus responds to her. It's fascinating, isn't it, that he comes to Martha and he brings truth. He brings a statement of this declaration of the reality of things. Here's the way things are, Martha. And then when Mary comes out, and Mary says something identical to what her sister had said, isn't it interesting? He saw her weeping. He heard the others weeping. He was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled, but he just asked, where have you laid him? And they said, Lord, come and see. And Jesus responds here not with this bringing truth, this declaration of truth, but he simply brings his tears. He brings his emotion. He brings himself in his humanity to the moment. You see, earlier what you have is the deity of Jesus stated so clearly, I am the resurrection and the life. I am God. Martha, you need to know in this moment that I am God and I hold life and death in my hands. But to Mary, Jesus cried. He brought us humanity. You see, when you face death, you need to know both of these things are true. You need to know intellectually and experientially in every fiber of your being, you need to know that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, but you also need to know that He cares. And you need to know that He experienced grief and He experienced the pain and He lived among us. He wasn't some out there being up and above and beyond the kind of the experiences of daily life. That's how the Romans viewed the gods. They were out there. They didn't have to go through stuff, But Jesus cried. He wept. Jesus' humanity on full display right in the presence of Mary and Martha. And I know you've been there. You've been there. You will be there. We've all been there. To that freshly dug grave. And when you experience those things, those moments, those times, you need to know both of these things are true. That Jesus can speak this declaration of truth into the moment, and He can bring about some consolation and some hope into the experience, because you can believe then, especially then, that He is the creator, the sustainer. He is life itself. But you also need to know that He knows what it feels like to hurt and to suffer. He knows what it's like, and He feels the range of human emotions. And so you don't stand at the tomb, you don't stand at the grave alone, but rather Jesus is there sitting with you. He's there in your presence, and He's weeping with you. It's okay. It is not a Christian teaching to just have a stiff upper lip and act as if it didn't happen. That's not Christian. You grieve. Yeah, you don't grieve as others who have no hope, but you grieve, you hurt. Jesus entered into that with you. He feels that with you. He wept. He's with you in death. But I want to go back up 2 verses, actually, and look at verse 33, because there's something else here that I want you to notice. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. That's one translation of it. You may have something a little bit different from that, but best I can tell, and one scholar, Greek scholar, said that there's not a single translation out there that gets it right. That for whatever reason, every translator of the Greek who comes to this text shies away from translating it into English the way that it ought to be translated. And the word means, if he's right on this, and I've got every reason to believe that he is right, that it ought to be translated something that implies anger. This word is a word that is used in some context of a beast stamping its feet, bellowing in anger and rage. The translators kind of shy away from that because I don't think we know what to do with it here. Deeply moved and greatly troubled, that's kind of euphemistic language to kind of hide us from the reality of the moment. And that is that Jesus is angry. Who's he angry at? Is he mad at Mary and Martha? Of course not. He's not angry at them. He's not angry at the crowd around him who are crying. He's not angry at himself. He's not angry at God. But certainly, given what we know about Jesus and what we know from things that the Apostle Paul would write as well, I think we know that he's angry at the enemy. He's angry at death. He's angry at what it means. He's angry at the fact that because of the brokenness of the world, that people have to go through moments like that. He's stamping his feet, as it were. He's shouting in the face of death. He's expressing his disapproval and his anger that this is a part of the human experience. Since Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve did what they did, and you and I followed in their footsteps, just as they did, we have created our own gods. We've defined our own truth. We've gone our own way. We've taken our fist and shook them in the face of God and said, I want to do it my way. And because of that, we live in a broken world. Death has come into the world, and death is the experience of all human beings. And Jesus, at this moment, his humanity, his deity, he stomps his feet, as it were, and he says, this is not the way it's supposed to be, and it's not the way it's going to be. Deeply moved and greatly troubled. And you think back to a time when you've been at a funeral or a memorial service, you've been at a graveside service with someone that you loved, and I know it's the case. I hope that as you look back, or maybe in the future as you face one of these moments, that you'll remember the intellectual part of this, that Jesus is who he says he is, and that he holds life and death in his hands. He makes us promises about the future. And I hope you'll also see and feel the tears of Jesus as he sits alongside of you and he cries with you. And I hope you'll also understand his disgust, his anger, that this world has become what it has become. We read on down in the text, though. Jesus was deeply moved again, reflecting the language from above. Deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and seen what he did, they believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. The chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council, and they said, what are we to do if this man performs many signs? Skip down to verse 53. They have a conversation here, but verse 53, so from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Verse 44 says that the man who had died, Lazarus, came out. 9 verses down below, it says, from that day on, they made plans to put Jesus to death. What you have here in the text is that in order for Jesus to step into death and bring about resurrection, he had to offer himself. That's what happened. As a result, of course, there had already been conversations about Jesus and how he was an enemy of the religious leaders of the day, right? But this is that moment that everything had been building to, but now Jesus goes to the tomb of Lazarus and he says, come out, Lazarus. And because of the fact that he did that, it led to his own demise. You see, what he was doing here is he was bringing life. But in order to bring about life, in order to bring about resurrection, he had to die. So the connection between 44 and 53 is clear, isn't it? Because some of the people believe, but some of them went to the Pharisees. They went to the religious leaders, and they said, this is what's happened. They have a conversation here, and essentially the conclusion of the conversation is, Jesus has to die. We've been talking about it. He's got to die. He's got to die. And of course, Jesus, not too long after this, would be crucified. Ultimately, you and I, we go to the tomb, or we hear the words from the radiologist or from the surgeon, faced with our own mortality. There are things we need to know. We need to believe that he's the resurrection and the life. We need to believe that he cries with us. We need to believe that this is not the way the world is supposed to be, that this is disorder, this is chaos. God's going to make it all right again one of these days. But we need to know that. But ultimately, we need it to point us to something more than that moment. We need to understand that, yes, we will experience. If God lets the earth stand, you and I will experience this. He hasn't taken away death as far as our experience yet. But because of Jesus going to the cross, and because when those women went to the tomb early Sunday morning and they found it unoccupied, we know we face death differently. We face it differently. He's not only with us theoretically. Jesus went to the tomb. See, it was there. It was there when he proved with finality that he is the resurrection and the life. Jesus resurrected from the tomb on that Sunday morning, definitively declaring that death has died. And that's why Paul would write this in 1 Corinthians 15. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. O death, where is your sting? I was talking to Joy this morning when she called. She said that last night, her daughter, their daughter, and their son had to travel in, but he got there in time, and she said, and we sang, these are her words, she said, we sang Steve into the arms of Jesus. Oh, death, where is your sting? Yeah, it hurts. It hurts. The sting still stings, doesn't it? But you see, the confidence we've got is that because He's the resurrection and the life, because He cries with us, because He is angry at the way the world is and has pledged to us His commitment to fix it, and because on Sunday morning the tomb was empty, Jesus was resurrected from the grave. Because of that, we know that this world as it is not the way it's always going to be. And we know that Jesus is taking the sting out of death. And so we look forward to that day. We look forward to that day when we, like Lazarus, hear those words from Jesus. Put your name in the blank. Come forth. You get out of there. Come out of that grave. It's coming a day when all who are in the grave shall hear His voice. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of damnation. See the choices in front of us now. If you're not a Christian, becoming a Christian doesn't mean you're going to avoid death. But what it does is it changes the experience eternally. If you're not a Christian, but perhaps you've been considering, you've been looking at it from the periphery, would you go ahead and take that step and become a follower of Jesus? Not to avoid death, but because death is coming, and because you want to face it, like Mary and Martha could face it, like my friend back home could face it. You want to know that this world and all of its mess and brokenness and chaos and disorder, you want to know and have confidence that this isn't the way it's supposed to be, and it's not the way it's going to be. And if you'll put your faith and trust in Jesus, then one of these days you will have the ultimate experience of hearing Him cry out your name, and you'll live with Him forever. Be baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of your sins. Put Him on and embrace the salvation that's based on the grace that's available through Jesus Christ because of what He's done for you. Maybe you need to ask for prayers today, that God will help you to have this kind of perspective, that if you're walking away from Him, that you'll come back to Him today and embrace this kind of relationship with Him that's characterized by confidence and hope, especially in those darkest moments. Let's stand and sing for your encouragement.